What if you had the power to turn your online influence and the creativity that lives inside you into a real business and live a life of freedom? I'm Kristen Bousquet, and I've been a full time creator for over 3 years, and I've brought in over $350,000 from sponsored posts and content creation collaborations with brands so far. Social Scoop is the podcast where we teach you, the entrepreneurial creator, to turn your online influence into a profitable, self sustaining business. Let's dive right in. Guys, I'm so excited for today because Christen is someone that I've wanted to have on the podcast. She's someone that I look up to. I love watching everything she does. So I'm super excited for our conversation today. Christen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Of course. I mean, we have so many creators that listen to the podcast, so many entrepreneurs, and I feel like you've had such a well rounded experience dipping your toes into so many things with the creator industry and social media in general. So I feel like you have a lot to offer.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I also feel like you are doing a great job of taking advantage of like being a creator, having an audience, and trying to think of like how you can turn that into more of like sustainable business and future. So yeah, excited to dive in.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely appreciate it. So, for anyone who is listening and hasn't kind of seen what you do with your business or seen what you do on social media, I would love for you to kind of just give like the general rundown of who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So basically my whole career I have spent working with influencers, creators, however you want to label. Um, I personally like prefer the term creator. So I started off
Same.
like working in like on brand deals. So I was kind of like the middle woman between big brands and creators. I was actually executing the brand deals. And so I started off like actually kind of facilitating deals on YouTube and traditional blogs. And then from there, I ended up working at a lot of the platforms. I was at Instagram, working on their creator programs, and I was at Pinterest. And then most recently, I was at TikTok. And I myself became a creator over the pandemic, just with like all the opportunity and TikTok
Yeah.
being such a great way to be discovered. And then I would say during my time of being starting to become a creator in 2020 and also working at TikTok, where like all of a sudden I feel like anyone could become a creator with the rise of TikTok. I felt like I was like seeing an interesting thing happen. And I always knew like, creators were getting paid a ton of money for brand deals. But I think it took me being a creator and also kind of working at TikTok to realize like a lot of creators didn't have a lot of guidance in terms of how much to charge brands for like TikTok videos, Instagram posts.
Yeah.
So I was on a lot of deals where like I would see some of the creators I worked with getting paid like $20,000 for a video, and then others would get paid like 1,000. And I was like, "Ooh, this is like crazy how like some people just don't realize how much money you can make." And I think for me,
Right.
I also like consider myself kind of an expert, having like worked in this industry my whole career. And I remember when I was like over the pandemic, Barnes and Noble reached out to me and they asked me for my rate, and I responded with what I thought was like a good rate for myself, and they like basically were like, "Hey, that's too much money for us, and we don't even want to counteroffer because
Yeah.
it would be like insulting to you." And I just remember like, wow, if who I thought I was more of like an expert, can't even like figure this out, then I knew that there had to be some sort of like resource for creators. So I left my job at TikTok in earlier this year to launch an app where creators can and share their pay rates anonymously and share reviews on the brands that they've worked with. So the idea is if Barnes and Noble were to reach out to me, I could go to Clara, which is my app. It's called Clara for Creators, and see how much they paid other creators my size, and then use that information to like go into that conversation with
Yeah.
Barnes and Noble and have more knowledge and like negotiate a better rate for myself.
I love it. I mean, you would think that something like this would already exist. So it's awesome that you're the one who's like really bringing it to the forefront because for every other industry, you can literally just like go on LinkedIn, go on Glassdoor, go on Indeed and see what
Yeah.
you should be getting paid, but like for most of us creators, for lack of a better term, we're kind of just pulling it out of our ass most of the time trying to figure out like is this
Yeah.
is this something a brand will take or not? I don't know. Let's just see what happens. So there's not like a lot of regulation, which is honestly like a huge problem. It really is.
Yeah, and like what I saw working at these platforms is that like what ends up happening, and maybe you can also speak to this, but like a lot of like black creators will talk to black creators, and a lot of Hispanic creators or fashion creators will talk to fashion creators. And the problem
Yeah.
with that is then like you're very siloed in terms of understanding like, oh, if I'm only talking to, Hispanic creators and I'm like in a group, then like I'm only going off of what they say, but I should be looking at the
Yeah.
full picture. So like, yeah, and it's kind of like if everyone's just talking in silos, you don't really understand like the potential of what's possible. So the idea is
Right.
just to like make the information accessible.
Yeah, I love that, I love that. So I wanna talk about this more, but first I wanna kinda touch on, like, going in order of what you've done in your career. I mean, you've worked at the biggest platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest. These are obviously, like, where a lot of creators are building their brands, building their businesses. So I would love to kind of just hear about, like, your experiences working at the different companies. I know for me, it seems like it must just, like, be so cool, but I don't know, like, it always seems cooler from the outside than maybe it is from the inside, so I'm curious to hear about your experiences.
Yeah, I think my biggest like so one all the platforms were like just super cool like to work for. I will say like I think um Instagram and TikTok were definitely my favorites out of the two. And I think when I started working at Instagram, it was funny because like they didn't I started there in 2017 and like they were not leveraging creators or even to
Oh,
be
yeah.
honest caring about creators the way that they do now. And I think it evolved, which I'm glad. But I remember when I got there, I had come from doing like influencer marketing, and I was like trying to tell them like, hey, you can use creators for like a lot of what you're doing. You don't have to do
Yeah.
traditional ads. Like you can lean into creators. And so when I was there, I helped launch this like creator program, and like it was like basically the goal was to prove to them that like creators are a thing. Like you should lean into creators for marketing. And that was something like early 2017. It's so interesting to think back because like now it's completely changed and they have
Oh, yeah.
creator programs, creator grants, they have a creator page. But it all had like, in the early days, it was like it took some convincing. Like people weren't bought in on influencers or creators. And I
Right.
think even still it's interesting because like people like that are not in the influencer world, they don't believe that creators are like legitimate. They're like, oh, you're an
It's
influencer.
crazy. How are
It's
we still at this point?
it's
Like
so wild to me, but yeah, I think, I think my favorite place to work was TikTok because they were the first, like, company that I felt like were actually really investing in creators, and, like, I just felt like I saw so many creators' lives change from TikTok. TikTok elevated them in ways that, like, I
Yeah.
had never seen a platform do, and launched grant programs and just did so much work, and that's because they have, like, the people actually leading the teams really, really do care. So, I think
Right.
working at TikTok was definitely the highlight for me just because, like, I think the success stories that came out of being on TikTok during the pandemic were just like crazy
Crazy.
compared to anything I'd seen before.
Yeah. But it's interesting that you say that from an inside perspective that like you noticed working there that at TikTok they really did value creators so much more cuz even from an outside perspective I feel like that's what we see, like we all see Instagram saying, "Okay, we care about creators, we care about creators," but it feels like they need to like put their money where their mouth is a little bit more whereas on TikTok I believe a lot more that they genuinely like are in it for our success based on, like the resources that they give us and
Yeah.
how we are able to like have more success realistically on TikTok than we are on Instagram for majority of people.
I mean, I agree. Like, I feel like that's it from all the creators I've talked to, they're like, it feels so genuine, like from TikTok. And I think the difference
Yeah,
is TikTok is so much more proactive in terms of like, we're gonna launch this program, we're gonna do this, and then Instagram is kind of like, and these other platforms are like, TikTok is like the standard, like the lead. So they'll see TikTok doing things, and they'll be like, wait, we have to
right.
launch this. And then as a result, what tends to happen is they kind of do a half ass version
Yeah,
of like what TikTok did. So it doesn't
right.
come off as like, authentic.
Right. Which is crazy because TikTok is the newest platform. So it really does just kind of go to show you like they know their shit. They're coming into it and they're like, we're the newest, but we're setting the standards for all of these other platforms that have been around for, 10 plus years.
Yeah, 100%.
It's crazy to watch. It really is. And I feel like for me personally, again, as a creator, like I do like to spend more time on TikTok. As a consumer, I like to spend more time on TikTok. I just feel like especially as of recently, Instagram is it's not like the happiest place to be. I think a lot of people would probably agree to that. It feels like we're kind of just like in the middle of their experiments.
Right. There's just like they're
Like
testing out these new features and we're like 100%.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So I've seen in, your content on socials that you talk about how you left one company, went to another, and you were actually able to, bump up the amount of money you were getting paid by really decent amounts. So I would love to kind of have you tell us more about like how that happened and like what were strategies going into it, leaving one company and kind of like leveraging that going into another.
Yeah, so I think my first so I think, like, when I first started off my career, I was kind of, like, naive to understanding, like, I just assumed if I did good work, companies would pay me fairly, and,
You would
I
think.
learned yeah, I learned at my first company I worked at a company called Pop Sugar, which, you might
Oh
have
yeah.
be familiar with them, but,
Yeah.
I was working there, like, 2 years, and I remember I got, like, promoted a couple times, and I really liked my job, but then I they hired like a new girl that was working at the front desk and she had just graduated college. So I was like a lot more older than her. And I
Okay.
had been working there. And I remember she told me like, "Oh, I'm making 65,000 a year." And that was like the first time I think in my work history anyone had ever like shared their
Yeah.
salary with me. And I was like, and I remember thinking like, "Oh my gosh, I've been working at Pop Sugar and I'm getting paid like 40,000 a year." And they hire a new girl fresh out of
Oh.
college and they're giving her 65,000. And I remember
And,
just
like, your
kind of
jobs
being
are so different.
right, and, like, if anything, I'm like, "I've been here longer, shouldn't you be paying me, like,
Wow.
more than someone fresh out of school?" And I mean, my role, like, was just, like so I was in marketing, so, like,
Right.
I felt like I should have been paid more anyway, but, I think hearing that and she was a friend, so it wasn't like I wasn't, like, mad,
Yeah.
I just was kind of, like, floored at that point, so I remember after that, I started looking for jobs, and then the next job, I got they gave me an offer of like 60K, which was like better than what I was making there. So I was like, sure.
Yeah.
And I thought back of like, okay, as I was there, they were giving me tiny raises of like $2,000, like, when I got promoted. And I'm thinking
Right.
like, why would I continue to stay there, like bumping up slowly when I could just go somewhere else and make like, 20%
Yeah.
more. So I got that role at a company called Aspire IQ, which was like a marketplace for creators.
Yeah.
And then from there, I got basically recruited for this role at Instagram, and it was the same thing. I was like, oh, they initially offered me 88,000, and I was like, whoa! I had only been at that other role for like 6 months, and then I was already getting an offer for like
Yeah, it's a big
20K
difference.
more. And so I think for me, it was like a good lesson of like you have to weigh so many different factors, but I think, like, early on in my career
Yeah.
living in San Francisco, being broke, it was, like, a very much a strategy for me to make more money and feel financially secure, and I kind
Right.
of continued hopping until I felt like I was at a really good place and I, was, like, very financially independent. So, job hopping was something that really, really helped me kind of, like, get to where I am now and feeling secure and able to leave my job and create a
Yeah.
company, in a way I would have never been able to do if I had stuck at that same first job for like 10
Yeah.
years. It would be a much
That's
different
so true. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about. I'm curious too, like, I've seen in movies or in TV shows. I've, like, never worked a salary position, so I, like, don't even know personally how that works. So I'm curious, when you did get offers, like, from these other places, did you bring them back to the places that you worked at and say, like, "This is what's happening, like, you sure you
company.
wanna let me leave?" Like, did that happen?
Well, it's funny because I think in my first job, Pop Sugar, I was ready to go because I felt undervalued and I was like, "I'm
Yeah,
gone."
that's fair.
And then when I got a job at Instagram, I was just like, yes, I'm going to Instagram. But
Yeah,
I think the first time I really was kind of sad to go is so I went from Instagram to Pinterest. And then at Pinterest, I was only there a year and I got recruited for this role at TikTok. And I think like I was so excited about TikTok at the time. It was like right before
yeah,
pandemic. I love the app. And so for me, it was like, oh, this kind of sucks because I've only worked at Pinterest a year. I wasn't trying to find a job, but it kind of found me. And I remember talking to my
yeah,
boss, and she was like, "Well, do you want me to take your offer from TikTok and try to,
right.
get you more money here? Like, do you want to stay or do you want to leave? So I think like that was something like I could have done if I had wanted
Yeah.
to. But I think for me, I also just like feel like I tend to get a little bored at work, right? It's like you're kind of doing the same thing. And
Mhm.
so I think for me, I'm always wanting like a new challenge. And so staying in a role for like 2.5 years is kind of like the perfect amount of time for me up
Yeah.
until this point. Cause then I feel like, okay, now I can go somewhere else, like learn a different way of doing things, work with different people, and continue to kind of like,
Right.
grow in my career. So I think it's definitely like an option if you want to bring in your offer and try to get more money. But I have heard there's some like crazy statistic that like if you do like counter or bring your offer into your current employer, you like I don't know what the stat is. It's a crazy stat. It's
Yeah.
like most people end up leaving within a year. So like if you're already kind
Wow.
of like feeling the itch to like leave an
Yeah.
interview, ultimately you probably are going to end up leaving soon anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I can see that. I mean, also curious to think about this too. Like, you had all of these great roles at all of these great companies, like, even aside from the social apps like Aspire, Pop Sugar, like, these are all really great companies. And working in different positions with all of these, great leaders and everything was probably so helpful for you to get to the point you are at now, where you have your own company. Like, you must have learned so many amazing things again from these really big companies that you're bringing to Clara now.
Yeah, I think like it's been so cool to just like work at different places, see different approaches, like as we
Yeah.
talked about earlier, like Instagram's approach to creators versus TikTok's. I think for me, it was just kind of like one, I saw like a problem that I felt like wasn't being addressed
Yeah.
and people that didn't care enough about creators, right? I saw a bunch of things, that were targeted towards businesses, but not actually creator first. And I think the other thing is like with the creator economy, the way it's been, like there's such a unique opportunity for people to establish their
Yeah.
personal brand. And when I was working at these companies, like TikTok especially, is when I became a creator, I was getting so much like media requests and all these different opportunities. And like having a full-time job and being a creator for me was a little bit problematic because my
Yep.
content was about career and jobs. And so I would have like, I remember I had like Fortune magazine reaching out and like wanting to interview me, and I had some like Good Day LA requests coming in, and I'd have to go through TikTok and get them approved. And it was always like tricky, right? Because
Okay.
it's like, for TikTok it felt like I was a bit of a risk because I was a creator and I was like talking openly like to
Yeah.
media, and they were like always a little bit concerned, which it's kind of like for me, I saw an opportunity to like build my personal brand. And I felt like
Right.
I was kind of being held back in a way that I didn't want to be. I'm like, this is a unique time where creators can
Right.
really establish a name and a brand for themselves. And I don't want to just like be, a corporate employee. Like I want to build something
Yeah.
more meaningful. So I feel like it's been interesting. And like I said, working with thousands of creators who have just like I feel like pre-TikTok, I didn't really know a lot of dentists or chiropractors, and now I can tell you like some of my favorite like dentist and chiropractic creators that have like their own like offices, and it's like
It's
this is
crazy.
just such a unique time for to be a creator. So I've like wanted to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and again, like, the work that you're doing is so helpful, so it must be cool to be able to work with so many creators, but also, like, be such a great resource to them all at the same time. But I'm sure, like, when you were first making that transition to, like, "I'm gonna leave my stable 9 to 5 job where, like, I have benefits and I have all these, great things and a place to work every day and all of that," to going to create your own startup, that must have been, like, a really scary shift. How did that whole process go for you?
Yeah, I think it was so honestly, it was so scary. What I did before I left officially is I took like a 3-week vacation.
Yeah.
And I was feeling so burnt out just because working at TikTok during the pandemic, it was like the craziest time to work there. Like
Yeah.
you had like the potential Trump ban happening. We had a very lean team because like with the Trump ban, like hiring was put on pause, and like there was just so much
Yep.
stuff happening, and creators were blowing up on TikTok, and it was a really difficult time to work there just because I didn't have a lot of like work life balance. And so I think for me, I
Right.
was already kind of feeling like I was burnt out, but I took a 3-week break before I gave my notice to really like try to see if like this is like the right move for me. And I think like after that 3 weeks, I was like so certain, like I was just like, I need to do
Yeah.
this. And I think for me, I'm like, I can always go back to corporate America if I want to have a
Yep.
9 to 5. Like, it's always going to be there, but like, sometimes you just have to kind of like take a chance and leave stability behind. And so that part was hard, but I do think, being a creator on the side and having other streams of income definitely like helped me feel a little bit more comfortable in that decision. I think like if I wouldn't have been a creator, there would be no way I could just like leave my, 6-figure job and like start my own company. But
Yeah.
having just like, some brand deals every month really, really helped.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, first of all, when you leave what's comfortable, I feel like that's when really great things happen because like you're allowing yourself to like do something on your own and a lot of those times you have to like pull out all the stops to find out just how much you're capable of. And I think that's a really cool like learning experience for so many people. It's so scary, but also I think it's just so valuable. Again, even if it doesn't work out, whatever, like 9 to 5 is always there. You can always go back. But I think it was so cool that you took that chance. I love it. Now obviously, with your company, your focus is on being transparent, creating transparency, I guess, within the creator economy, trying to show other creators what, people are getting paid and help them kind of have more of like a baseline, I guess, or kind of like regulate what people are getting paid, which obviously right now is like not at all what's happening. It's crazy. I'm in the process of building this like little creator rate chart of just like what's your
Mhm.
follower count, your engagement rate, and like how much are you charging for a TikTok or an Instagram? And I'm gathering all of this onto a spreadsheet and it's crazy to see like people that have, half the amount of followers and like 10 times better engagement rate than I do. People that I thought would be charging 5 times what I charge are charging like not even a quarter of what I charge. So it really is so needed, but so crazy to see just like where everyone's head is at, I guess, when it comes to creating their rates. I'm curious, like, what do you see the future of creator compensation looking like?
Yeah, I mean, so I think what you said is like it's so true. I mean, it's something I've seen on my app as well. Like even
Yeah.
just looking at averages across follower counts, like I remember like kind of analyzing some of the data that's been submitted, and I think on average, people on Clara that make between or that have between 500,000 and 3 million followers, they make around 4,000 for like one TikTok video. And I think that's crazy because I
It's just
have 300
yeah.
something thousand followers and I charge 5,000 to TikTok.
I was
So I
gonna
was
say, I feel
like,
like that's low for them for sure.
right, like it's so low. And I think like, yeah, I've seen, creators submit rates for the same campaign on Clara, and some will be like 3 times what the other one will, and they'll have half the amount of followers. So
Yeah.
I think like, what we've been seeing in terms of salary transparency on TikTok, like the New York laws around salary transparency, like I think that with creators and pay, there needs to be more transparency. And I think that's why I like
Yeah.
wanted to leave because I'm like, if no one spearheads this, it's just gonna like be messy. And I think it's bad for both brands and creators when there's no transparency because brands are like, why the hell is this person saying that they want $5,000 when they only have, X amount of followers, when
Right.
this other creator who has double that follower has like is asking for half the amount. So I think like
Yeah.
both the brands and the creators need transparency. And I also think like on the brand side, like I've seen, I'm sure you've seen this too, like creators will like put brands on blast and say, this brand only offered me X amount. Like this is a huge
Yep.
brand and like this sucks. And I think for me, I'm like, I would see and I'm like, yeah, they probably just have an uneducated team running. Like they don't realize this. And it's because no
Right.
one is talking to each other. You have like it's just not a recipe for success. So I think like
Right.
the more transparency, I think the better. One of the things that TikTok did that I thought was just like incredible is a lot of the campaigns that they did, they would do like a baseline for everything. So like they'd be like, okay, we're gonna launch this new campaign, and I'm just like making up this number, but no
Yeah. Yeah.
creator doing this campaign will make under $5,000. Like we're gonna pay everyone a flat
Right.
fee of minimum of 5,000, and if people require more, then like that's whatever. But I think, the whole traditional way of asking of brands asking creators, it's always like, what's your rate? Which is like such a recipe for disaster. Because if I say $800
Right.
or if I say $8,000, like they'll just accept whatever I say is my lowest rate. So I think
Yep,
The brands
exactly.
need to have some guidelines for how they work with creators that are ethical in the same way,
Right.
a job would have like a minimum amount that they would pay. And
Right.
so I think like more of that is what needed. But the problem is it's like you need educated people who've worked. When I say educated, I just mean like a lot of knowledge of creator
Yeah.
economy.
Right.
So be working behind the scenes and really help like spearhead some of that like
Right.
equality, right?
Yeah, that's actually a really great point because I feel like in my head a lot of the times I'm like, no, the influencers, they need to know like how much they should charge. And obviously that's true, but it's the brand also does need to be educated on that just as much, if not more than the creators. I know
Yeah.
for me, I had kind of like this weird situation happen earlier this year where I had an agency reach out to me. They're an agency like I've gotten emails from a million times, and every time they send me an email, the rate that they offer me is offensive, like every single time. And it's always these big brands that they're working with. And so they caught me on a day where I was like, I'm not taking this anymore. And so I posted it on TikTok and I was like, they offered me, it was like $200 for like a reel, a TikTok stories, like all of this crazy stuff.
Mhm.
And so I was just like, guys, look at this is the problem here, and I made a TikTok video about it. And the agency actually reached out to me. They saw it and they were like, upset because they were like, I wish that we had this conversation. I was like, you guys don't understand. Every single time you send me an email, I tell you this rate is extremely low. This is what it should be for someone, at my follower count, my engagement, whatever. You guys are offering me a crazy low rate. And I tell them that every time. And so, we had a conversation about it and she was like, thank you for bringing it to my attention because I'm glad that now we know and we're able to like make changes, but it's crazy because like I still have people messaging me over it like, "Look at this offer I just got from this agency. Remember when you made that video?" And I'm like, "Well, all right, nothing changed here." So hopefully like more people start speaking up in these experiences and eventually, hopefully, at least the brands and the agencies do start to kind of like have some sort of baseline or some regulation because, $200 for all of that work at any follower account I think is offensive?
I think like you're right. And I think also the thing that I noticed just personally being a creator is like I had probably worked on like, I don't know, at least like 20 deals, whatever, in the last like
Yeah.
year or two. And in every deal, I think I had only got one brand that sent a survey like, how did we do? So it's like not only do they
Wow.
need guidance on like the pricing, but I think they also need guidance on like how to work with creators. Cause so many of those campaigns, like I remember thinking, I will never work with this brand again. Like they suck. Like
Mhm.
they're like literally being so prescriptive in what they want me to do in the script and the revisions. And like I think
Yep.
that's another thing is like, they also the brands need feedback. And a lot of times like it's great that you like made a video, but I think like a lot of times creators don't even take it that far. They just like are like, oh, I hated that experience, but whatever, I'm never
Yep.
working with them again. And like the brands need that feedback. So that's also a key
Yeah.
piece of like why creators sharing their feedback like on Clara or wherever it is so important because otherwise they're not really asking you and they're not going to get better. And so it's
Right.
like they need the transparency themselves because otherwise they're just going to like make it a pain in the ass to work with them every
Yeah.
single time.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I don't think I've ever gotten a survey or anything, but why is that not a thing? Like after every partnership, how did we do? How was this experience for you? Because it's true, like there are so many agencies, so many brands that I'm like, I tell all my friends, I tell all my students, I'm like, if you see this agency, you see this brand, like red flag, run the opposite direction, horrible
Yeah.
experience. And like that could be something that is improved obviously, but if they don't offer me the opportunity, I feel weird coming into their messages and be like, "By the way, here's how you should run everything." So having a survey I feel like would be a great option.
I mean, 100% because I think even like on some of the brands that have been reviewed on Clara, like you obviously have the brands like Coldest Water Bottle, which we like know like how that is perceived, but you have other
Yeah.
brands that I think are doing very similar to what Coldest Water Bottle does, like just asking for an integration, but they are like loved by creators because
Yeah.
they have a different approach, they have a different team working for them, and like so I think it's like they just need the feedback because like ultimately you have these brands that creators love working with every single time. Like I know for me, like every time I've worked with Fishbowl quite a bit. And they're kind of like a Glassdoor slash Reddit for
Yeah.
professionals. But like every time they literally just let me do whatever I want. They're like, yeah, just like look on the app and feel like what feels organic to you. And like that's it. But like
Yep.
compare that to other experiences I've had with similar brands where they like give me a script, they gave me a 20-page brief. They're like three, like, it's just like such a
Yeah.
painful experience. It's like if they just had the feedback. And the funny thing is when you try to be too prescriptive, it's like it doesn't even end up hitting, right? It's like the
Exactly.
videos don't
Right.
even do as well. So it's like if they just knew and could really like hear creators out and just like provide more freedom, flexibility, and give us more
Right.
creativity, they would be better off anyway.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that point. I can also see it from the creator or from the brand or agency perspective too, though, because I, in a past life, also used to do campaign management, and I was just truly shocked at the experiences that I had working with some people that would like, respond with like no punctuation in their emails and like, all these things that I'm just like, there's literally no way I'm not giving you a script? So like I guess it also goes along with like making sure the brand is doing their research and choosing creators that do feel like okay, they know their stuff. They've worked with all these brands, like they must know how to do this. So maybe they could kind of go and do a little bit more research that might be helpful, but I know from being on their other side too that I'm like, okay, I kind of get it at the same time.
I mean, definitely brands have reached out to me and they've said, like, "Can we review creators on your site?" And I'm like, I don't think I don't think
That's
we're
fine.
ready for that right just yet." But yeah, that's not something I want to have because I mean, I do get it. Like you said, from the brand's perspective, sometimes creators can
Yeah.
like not be professional or not send things in on time. But like, yeah, it's definitely like
Yeah.
people just need more transparency in general.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Have you ever been in these situations? I mean, now that you know what you should be charging, like you're confident in your rates. Have you ever gotten in situations where the brand is like, that's great that that's your rate and everything, but like we don't have that budget and they don't even try and negotiate. Again, like kind of similar to how we were talking about with, your corporate jobs where they're like it would almost be offensive for me to try and counter offer. What do you do in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think like, well, for me, I think in general, I just like am I really only do campaigns I know are gonna perform well because otherwise I just
Yeah.
feel like it's a waste of everyone's time.
Yeah.
Um, but I think there has been a lot of circumstances, like I've done videos for like these more nonprofit type women's focused women in tech events and like campaigns. And I've done stuff that like are way below my rate just because I'm like, okay, this is like some like a cause related thing that I
Right.
believe in. Or when there's product that I want. And I think like,
Right, yeah.
you gotta weigh the pros and cons, or if I think it'll lead to like a bigger relationship. Like sometimes I'll get like, oh, they want to send you product, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll just post like on my story in hopes to kind of
Yeah,
like build up that relationship and get a deal later on. I've definitely seen that happen for me in the past, and so
yeah,
I'm I'm a believer that like I'm willing to kind of like maybe do something like initially for not for free,
right.
but like just to
You're
try to
reasonable.
yeah, yeah, because I
Yeah,
think, like, ultimately, if it's a brand I really could see working with and see potential, then, like, I'm super open to it, but I definitely think, like, all creators have different motivations, and you have to figure out, like, what, those are,
right.
so I think, like, if you don't believe in doing product for, like, posting, then that's totally fine, but I think, like, for me, like, if I'm gonna get, like, free clothing that I would have been spending money on, like, to me, like, sometimes it might be worth it if it's
Yeah,
a brand I really love, so I'm always just kind of like what do situation by like situation to really figure out like what I'm willing to do versus what I'm not
yeah.
willing to compromise
That's
on.
that's fair. I feel like I do the same thing, like I have my base rate, but like there are plenty of times when I will go below that if it makes sense for me. Again, like you use your best judgment, weigh the pros and cons. Like how do you feel, deep down about this? Is this something like in your conversation with this brand or this agency that you really feel like they're going to like they want to keep working with you, they're going to want to build something, then okay, like, you have to make your best your judgments, based on experience by experience for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Last thing I want to talk about, are there any things that you've learned working at, big companies, Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, that you think would be valuable for creators to take into consideration when they are essentially building their careers on these apps?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much. I think like my biggest tips, like, well, I mean, depending on where you are in your content journey, I think like the one thing is that like it's really well, one, if you're trying to work, like a lot of times creators like, how do I get a point of contact and get recognized by these
Mhm.
platforms? I think to speak to that piece, it's like at most of these platforms, it's like when we're trying to find creators, it's usually around a specific like initiative, right? Or like
Right.
something that's happening. And so if you, for example, just went to like, the TikTok newsroom or the Instagram like news like portal, you could kind of see
Yeah.
like what they're prioritizing. So for example, right now, I think industry wide, it's kind of like diverse communities, right? So if you are a part of like a diverse identity community, like you're a Black creator, you're like that's something that you should kind of like openly, if you're comfortable with it, putting it out there if you're trying to get a rep, right? Because I think
Yeah.
a lot of the things that would happen at TikTok is I would be recruiting for like these different communities, and like I wouldn't be sure if this creator was like Hispanic or not. So I'm like, oh, I can't, I don't want to invite them and like offend them, just
Right.
because I
Yeah.
think that they could be. So I think like as a creator, it's super important that if you're open to it, that you vocalize like kind of identity pieces of who you
Yeah.
are, just because these platforms won't know if you're part of the LGBTQ community unless you explicitly tell them.
Yeah.
And I think like a lot of that can be really like, I mean, I remember countless times at TikTok, I would be trying to find people, for opportunities and related to like Pride Month. And like, I wouldn't know unless I had like
Yeah.
they explicitly told me. And so as a result, I felt like there were so many really amazing opportunities that were only going to the people that were like really, really loud about, XYZ.
Yeah.
And so I think as a creator, it's kind of your responsibility to like really showcase who you are, so that you can be found for the right opportunities and you can like have a chance
Right.
to like share your story. And like so I think one is just kind of like sharing everything, right? So that goes back to like your personal brand and like who, like the type of content that you make, if you're like a mom, if you're like a writer, like
Yeah.
all these different aspects of kind of who you are, and sharing that openly so that like people know, because I remember even like the last couple years, like we would see so many cool opportunities like, oh, what creators do you know that are singers or that are like fashion designers? And like, I had
Yeah.
no idea unless like I had a conversation with a creator, they told me, like I
Yeah.
would not know. So I think really just like vocalizing that, and also just like putting as much out there as you're comfortable with, because ultimately it's like what makes you unique and what makes you stand out. And then I think the other
Right.
piece is really just like consistency on these platforms, because the platforms are never going to want to work with a creator that's like doesn't post, right? There's always some
Right.
criteria. It's like if they're working with creators, they have to be active. And so as long as you're posting, I would say like once a week, that's like a good baseline, but ideally a little
Right.
bit more than that.
Yeah, I mean, both of those things I think are great tips. It's interesting when I have these conversations with people that, do have experience kind of like behind the scenes with the apps or even just with brands. Everyone listening is like looking for us to go over this like secret crazy thing that no one's ever heard of before, like, but at the end of the day, I think this whole industry, creators making connections with brands and apps and all of this is so simple. It's like be who you are, be consistent about it, share what you feel is important, and like if it's a right fit, it'll work out. But like, there's not like a bunch of like magic secret formula behind it all.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true. And also, like, there are so many millions of creators, and there's just like not enough people at these companies, right? It's like they can't
Yeah.
possibly. So I'll like meet a lot of awesome creators. Like, I don't have a point of contact. I'm like, that's normal. Like,
Yeah.
there's 100 million of you. Like, not all of you are gonna have a point of contact. So, yeah, I think you're right. It's like kind of just like keep it simple. Like, just remember like who you are, share who you are, be
Right.
consistent, and like ultimately, I'm a believer like the right opportunity will find you.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Well, thank you so much. This was so awesome to have this conversation with you. I feel like we went over so many things that will be so helpful and like inspiring to everyone who is listening. So, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Of course. And you guys, all of the information that you need is down in the show notes. You can download the Clara app as well, so you can see what everyone else is charging, get all the inside scoop on what the brands are doing. I love the app. I use it all the time. So thank you so much, and we will see you guys next week.